Hello and welcome to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. This week, we're excited to have the Washington Post national security correspondent, Shane Harris, who's going to discuss his explosive report that Donald Trump, as an ex-president, could reveal, maybe even sell, our national secrets. Then longtime Democratic consultant Chris Huttman is coming on to tell us about how the Super Bowl of Senate elections, otherwise known as the two January 6 Georgia elections, how it's going to go. It's going to be a good show. Remember, we take your questions each episode, so write into politicswarroom@gmail.com or send a tweet to @Politicon for next week's show. We'll get to as many as we can, and this episode is sponsored by Magic Spoon. Please check out the link on the show notes, and we thank them for the support of the podcast. And thank all of you for listening today. Please tell your friends and remind them to subscribe on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. James Carville, how are you?
Well, I'm good. I mean, just like anxious to hear from our guest today. And the Shane Harris story, you're right, was just totally explosive. I think it's one of the biggest post-election stories I've ever seen. And Chris Huttman he knows Georgia. He really knows it well. So figure out if the Democrats are going to win there, what do they have to do and where do they have to do it? And they're very curious.
We got a lot to talk about. I want to start off. This is a little bit Georgia, but it's really all over the country. The Republicans are doing everything they can to steal this election. I really mean it. Steal this election. Wayne County, Detroit, where they were forced to back down after refusing to certify the vote. I mean, James, what they were attempting to do was say, okay, we'll count the rest of Michigan, but we're not going to count the big city, Detroit, with its predominant black community. Pennsylvania, they're coming up with stories that are so embarrassing, they're having Republican judges make fun of them. Lindsey Graham is all over the country and lying about what he's doing. They're not going to get away with any of this, but what they're trying to do is just stir up the masses. And it's really quite ugly.
Yeah, I mean, the point that we made before the election, not enough to win. I mean, I was obviously, like a lot of people, I was hoping we'd win by more, but it's going to fall somewhere between 4 and 5 points. Some people think it might be closer to 5. And the margins in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan were insufficiently close. But could you imagine what would happen if they were really tight and you didn't have Georgia and Arizona in the mixture? I mean, no telling what they would have done. I mean, they would have stolen this election. I mean, Biden won by enough that they can't do it. But it's really frightening to think what would have happened instead of winning. You know, if he'd be 2.5 points ahead right now, and those margins would really be close, they would have stolen.
You're right.
No doubt about that. But it's, the election, and you stop and you think about it, and you look at it, it's not particularly close.
No, and even you look at Pennsylvania, and Biden won Pennsylvania. It's now over 80,000. It may climb a little bit. Trump won it last time by, I think I'm right, 43,000. And no one was saying that's too close. It was fraud. There was something that went wrong. Let's redo it. It's so fraudulent. And I'm just stunned. I'm just stunned that two of the Senate perpetrators of this, I'm not really stunned, but I want to say that anyway, are Lindsey Graham, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and Ted Cruz, a former Supreme Court clerk. To both of them, the rule of law means nothing. And Lindsey Graham started off, he tried to interfere with the Georgia Secretary of State. He got caught. Give the guy a lot of credit for that. And then he said, well, I talked to the Nevada and I talked to the Arizona Secretary of State. No, you didn't, Lindsey. I'm sorry. And they said you didn't. Well, I was mistaken. No, you weren't mistaken. You lied.
I mean, look, he's a guy that he's got reelected. He's got a 6-year term. He obviously, I think, has fun making a fool of himself. I mean, I really don't understand it. I've been around him a couple of times. He seems like a perfectly normal, polite human being. And I think at some point, a lot of these guys just cross some kind of Rubicon of self-awareness. But generally, people don't like to be publicly humiliated. He seems to just try to get more of it. I really don't understand it. Then I can understand that people are scared of Trump, and they want to be judicious and careful. But Jesus, this guy's like he just keeps stepping on it, and looks like he just looks for another place to make a fool of himself.
Yeah. It never ends. Biden, so far, he's made some important White House appointments. A cabinet's coming up soon. What do you think of the tone he's striking?
If we've said this 1,000 times, Joe Biden is exactly who you think he is. If you're looking to be surprised, you're not going to be surprised. And I mean, I think that the people that he has picked, I know most of them. They're all very close, longtime allies and staffers for the president-elect. They're all solid people. I mean, this is not going to be like the New Frontier, the New Deal, where there's a lot of new people come in, but maybe, that's what he ran on. That's who he is. That's obviously the way that he's going to govern. And boy, am I looking forward to that over what we have. Wow. But,
Yeah.
So far, everything that he's done has been predictable. And I don't say that critically. All right. I just want to be careful. I'm not being critical. It's just a fact that, and, you know him well, you've known him over the years. I know him pretty good. But there's nothing about the president-elect that is surprising so far. I mean, there's no appointment you go, God, I can't believe he put that person in there. Now, he's going to have a really hard time putting a cabinet together because they got, you got to be confirmed. You have to have gender, racial, ethnic diversity. But if you can't get confirmed, it doesn't do any good.
Geographical.
So he's got a real, the way remember when you were a kid and it had like 20% of the air was out of the basketball and had like a dent. You keep trying to push the dent out and you push another dent. And it's going to be a real chess match putting the convertible positions together. It really is.
Yeah, I think it will be. My guess is he'll do it. And if history gives us any guide, the Republicans will find one, maybe two that they'll go after, or maybe two they'll go after, one they think they can reject or defeat. That tends to be a pattern. It's going to be even more so with Mitch McConnell. James, if he had won the way that we both kind of thought he was going to win, maybe by 10 points, 400 electoral votes, carried the Senate in with him, then I don't know if he would have been, but he could afford to be a bit more daring, a bit more bold, a bit more new, a bit more trying things, right, if you will. But when you have this, what he inherited, I think you're right. It's all predictable. It's all cautious. It's all competent. And I think that's what you need right now.
I hope so. I mean, I think we hoped he'd get 400 electoral votes. I don't know if we thought he would, but we certainly hoped that.
When we were talking Texas and Florida, we were up around 400.
We were talking, but it obviously didn't work out. But we were hoping. I mean, hoping. But what he did was pretty impressive. And I talked to Chris Huttman because what's really impressive is he won Georgia in spite of a massive white turnout in white rural Georgia too. So. If you come back and you put this election in perspective, it was not a squeaker. It really was not.
No, it was not. Georgia is a good news story, and we're going to talk to Chris about that and about the Senate race. James, right next door is a bad news story. Florida was, to put it mildly, a disaster for Democrats, and I'm sure there are going to be lots of recriminations. It was a rejection not only of Biden, but they lost a couple of members of Congress. They lost seats in the state legislature. Florida Democrats, have got a lot of learning to do, I guess, in the next couple of years.
Right, and look at the massive sums of money that were put into Florida,
right.
And it was in an environment where a $15 minimum wage got 60% of the vote.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so you can't say that's a reflexively conservative electorate. But there's something that Democrats do in Florida, and I mean, I think that Miami-Dade was just a crushing story, And I think the whole defund the police might be the stupidest, most harmful slogan that anybody's come up with in modern American politics.
Yeah, I mean, there may be competition, but I'm not quite sure what it
And
is
I'm
this year, at least.
trying to think
You know,
something right. And
you know, it's interesting. You mentioned Miami-Dade. You're so right. I mentioned Pinellas County in a column because I thought that's really going to be an interesting place to watch because it's got more senior citizens than I think any county in America. And Trump carried it last time, and I thought it was indicative of how seniors might go. Well, actually, seniors did go more for Democrats this time, more for Biden than they went for Clinton last time. And Biden carried Pinellas County. But boy, that was swamped by what happened down south in Miami-Dade.
Well, he carried Duval, which is Jacksonville.
Yeah.
I'd have thought that was, he carried Seminole. My kind of dashboard counties. If you other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how was to play?
No, and that was a pattern in North Carolina. He carried New Hanover, which we both thought would be the leading indicator. But so there's a lot to analyze as we go ahead, no question. James, I'm going to turn to some really good questions we got. We've got some really smart listeners, and we can probably learn from them. I hope they could sometimes learn from us. But the first one I think is relevant to what we're talking about. It's Greg, who is writing from New Lenox, Illinois. And he wants to know if you'll be able to, James, you have to take him off the ledge about Trump and others stealing this election somehow, which is my new reason he says he's taking Ambien every night.
Well, I take Ambien every night.
But, so do I.
Yes. So just, take a moderate dose. There's no... Joe Biden is going to be the president on January 20th. So please, there are many, many, many things to worry about between now and January 20th. And we're going to talk to Shane Harris about that. But if you want to stay up late at night worrying about what could happen in the next 2 months, that's probably worthy of your nervousness. Worrying about Joe Biden not being president is something not to worry about. So please, I'm not saying don't be nervous, don't be worried, but don't be worried about that.
Good advice, Dr. Carville. I'm not sure, Greg, if you need to take Ambien or not, but if you don't need to take it because Donald Trump will be in office after January 20th, because he won't be. Tom from New York City says, okay, Joe Biden has won. Well, now what? Is there a Tip O'Neill anywhere in the Republican ranks who can or will broker peace and help get things done over the next 4 years? The answer is no. There's no one even close. Kevin McCarthy has basically decided he's going to be a political hack as leader, and everything he does, he looks over his right shoulder because Jim Jordan is really going to be the dominant Republican, the dominant minority leader in the House. And Mitch McConnell never wants to get things done unless it means more power and money for him. So you can put together a coalition maybe on a few issues like infrastructure. But what happened back in the 80s, O'Neill and Reagan, and it exaggerated somewhat today. No question. But they did do some things. After doing a really bad, big tax cut, they then went and corrected it over the next 3 years. They later did a genuine Social Security reform and did a big tax reform. I don't think that's going to happen with the current lineup in Congress.
Well, I don't. But, there are things that people need. And, Mitch McConnell and his members are going to need things. The administration is going to need things. And, do I think it's going to be like some sweeping reform and, Medicare for all or something? No. But life goes on. And remember, we're not destined to have 4 years of this. It might be worse, but we got an election coming up in 2022. Right. And that's going to, play out pretty significantly. And, the political situation, the one thing we do not know is when that electoral college meets and obviously Biden walks out with 306 electoral votes, how much of these Republicans out there really think Trump has a chance? And how is that going to affect them? How is that going to affect Republicans in Georgia when he's beaten? I don't know. It might incite them more. It might come out more. It might come out less. It may not make any difference, but it's going to be a huge event, and he knows it. And I mean, that's the kind of definitive close to this. I mean, so you don't have to wait to January 20th for the definitive close. I think it's December 14th, but I could be off a day or two.
Hey, James, Jennifer from Virginia remembers everything you say, And she said that before the election, you suggested Trump would stir up his base in hopes of getting a deal on legal charges just to make it go away. Is that what's happening now?
It's a good chance. I mean, he's stirring up everything. He's trying to leverage as much as he can. You see where President-elect Biden said he hopes they don't really go after him. He gave some kind of a conciliatory statement, but there would be an independent Justice Department. He knows that the Manhattan DA, the New York AG, are in close pursuit of him. He's got a lot. He's got a lot on his mind. He's got a lot to negotiate. And which I think is really kind of strange, out of character. He's not going to Mar-a-Lago for Thanksgiving, and there's as somebody said I heard on the radio, history is not kind to autocrats who stay in bunkers. But he's going to try to maintain his leverage in any way he can, and then part of that is legal. And he's got to make decisions about pardons. I mean, he can pardon his whole family. He's got to make a decision about whether he can pardon himself or whether that'll hold up in court or not. He's got a lot on his plate.
Yeah, he does.
A lot on his plate.
And he cannot pardon himself from state crimes or the Manhattan District Attorney. So a lot to play out, and he may be plea bargaining. Hey, Charles is written from New Zealand. I love our New Zealand followers.
Right. Wow.
He said Mitch McConnell said if we don't do something about voting by mail, we're going to lose the ability to elect a Republican in this country. I would say bullshit, but we can't say that, James. So I'll just say bunk. I mean, really, vote by mail has been done by the state of Utah, which is hardly a left-wing Democratic liberal bastion, does all of its vote by mail. It used to be it favored the Republicans until Trump decided in this election that somehow because of the pandemic, that if he trashed voting by mail, it would hurt Democrats. That's the only reason he did it. And Mitch McConnell is just parroting that. If you go and you organize and your people care, then they'll vote by mail or they'll vote in person if we don't have a pandemic.
That probably cost him Georgia.
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, the Secretary of State, maybe Arizona too. I mean, it was kind of weird. And he just lashes out. Sometimes I don't think he's that strategic, but I think that he feels like the more trouble that he can cause, the better it is for his future in the Republican Party, and maybe the more promising his not very promising legal future is.
Yeah.
And we don't know how much, in addition to all of the criminal charges, and he's got that E. Jean Carroll defamation suit is proceeding. I mean, he's got a lot on his plate.
The rape case, yeah,
a whole lot.
Yeah, he does.
The pressure is excruciating, and it's becoming evident that this is not going to work out for him.
Yeah, he's showing. And
I don't know when
too. And I think Ivanka and Jared are not going to be parading around New York society for the next year or two.
I love that story.
I do too. Hey, we're going from New Zealand to, are you ready? Iceland.
Right,
sir.
Iceland. Oh my God.
Yeah, boy. If I foul up this name, which I will, it looks like Sigurjón from Iceland says that, James, this is down your alley. Is the woke movement damaging the Democratic Party? And if so, what should Democrats do?
Well, first of all, it is. I've said on television that these woke people need to take a nap. And this is a country that is just not a left-wing country. It just is not. Now, I think it's a center-left country. I'd argue that this is more a Bill Clinton country, a Barack Obama country, than it is a Trump country, or even George W. Bush. But it's not that there's no evidence that they can get any votes of any substantial number outside of urban areas. And remember, the Democrats had a very clean choice to make. Bernie Sanders, who is the most disciplined candidate maybe I've ever seen, was clearly the best funded candidate in the Democratic primaries, had the best organizations, had the most enthusiasm, and he got beat badly in the Democratic primaries. Not soundly, beat badly. So if you can't even get 30% of the Democratic Party behind you, how are you going to get 50.1% of the country behind you? I mean, this is not even a topic that is worth discussing. And they come back and they say the same thing. Well, you need to have more canvassing. Oh my God! And I understand that they don't want to give in. They don't want to admit that they hurt the Biden's chances. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of that stuff came back to haunt us, and they used it very effectively on us. And, the answer is, well, they're going to accuse you of socialism no matter what. Okay, but...
Yeah, but you gave them... But they had particulars this time. It wasn't just...
Yeah, they had some particulars and stuff. And I just don't even think, in my view, this is not even a debatable question.
Yeah, no, I agree.
When you hear them debated, they don't make any sense.
James,
more canvas.
James, we're going to stay in Europe. Daniel from the UK notes, this is an interesting question. In 2020, Virginia now appears to be a bedrock blue state. Georgia voted for Joe Biden, but North Carolina remains purple to red. What's the difference between North Carolina and Virginia in particular? Well, first of all, Virginia has those big Washington suburbs. I mean, that is a huge percentage of the vote. And North Carolina doesn't really have suburbs like that or that size. I also think that it's always easy to Monday morning quarterback. I think if the Democrats had put a little more resources in North Carolina, they only lost by 75,000 votes. Probably in retrospect, a little bit less in Florida. I think they could have carried North Carolina. Would have been close. And they certainly weren't helped by the sexting scandal of their Senate candidate and the way he handled it. But I don't consider North Carolina a red state. They have a very good governor. My son has worked for the governor, I want to point out. And he won by, I think, 5 points. And I think they can win a Senate race there in 22 and be very competitive in the next presidential election, given the right circumstances.
Well, also, Virginia has been well governed by Democrats. I mean, Mark Warner was a really good governor. Tim Kaine was a really good governor. Terry McAuliffe was a really good governor. Susan Schwecker, my old friend, she worked for me in 1982, is the chairman of the Democratic Party of Virginia. Perhaps, along with Wisconsin, one of the two best political parties in state parties in the United States. And, I mean, they work hard. They raise money. They promote people advance within the party. So there's also a real, deep bench in Virginia of Democrats. And they have the added advantage of the Republicans are really, the Virginia Republicans have really been taken over by nuts.
Well, so are the North Carolina Republicans. I mean, they are really, they are crazy. You're right about the governing. I mean, Jim Hunt was a great governor, but he went out of office 16 years ago, I guess.
Yeah, in the 80s.
And wait, no, he came back for a second time. He was governor for 16 years, 2 8-year stints. But Cooper is a very good governor. He's handled that COVID-19 crisis brilliantly. But it takes a while to build up that kind of bench. But I would be, if I'm a Democrat, I'm worried a lot about Florida, and I'm much less optimistic about Texas than we might have been 3 weeks ago. But North Carolina is right on that. Of all the states the Democrats lost, that should be number one on what they want to try to pick up next time.
Yeah, I'm not quite as despondent about Florida. I think we just made some unenforced errors there, but we'll see.
Yeah.
And, all of the things that made us optimistic about Texas are still going to be taking place in Texas.
You keep waiting.
Trump just got yep.
I know. James, the final question is from a professor, so it needs to go to you. It's Professor Hansfield, MD from the University of Washington. And this is something that you've noted. Democratic messaging often gets lost in the weeds. Can liberal Democrats with a capital D, forge simplistic phrases and arguments to make our case? What do we need to do? What do we need to do to read? This is not his question, but this is what he means. Right. How do you create? It's about the economy, stupid.
It's if you think about it, of course, Republican message is easy because it's basically turned into a personality cult.
Right.
All right. The problem the Democrats have is this: we are a party of coalitions, and we we're constantly, people are coming in and more enthusiastic in the coalition, or even subcultures almost. And Biden didn't have particularly strong messaging. I mean, he didn't get caught and make a lot of mistakes. Look, I think the 2018 message was just fine. We focused on things that are really popular that we do, like increasing the minimum wage, like expanding health insurance, like doing things about prescription drug benefits, by increasing people's ability to maybe join a union. And I think Trump snickered us in to constantly talking about him. And we didn't do that in 2018. And I think a lot of people thought, well, with him on the ballot, it just you can't get away from talking about him. To some extent, that was true. But I wasn't, I've said this before, I love Sam Elliott. I think he's a great actor. I've actually met him before. He's a great guy. I didn't like the close of this election. I think that we did not, it's hard for us to get like a real, clear, concise message because of the nature of our coalition. But I thought 2018 was a really good message year for us. And I think we got a little bit knocked out of our game.
I know. I think you're right. I think in part knocked out because of the emphasis on the virus. Everything I think Joe Biden and others said is right, but it tended to sublimate some other issues. Look, that Republican coalition, it's not as diverse as the Democrats, but they have the social conservatives, they have the economic conservatives, the small town, and they're able to find issues that don't offend them. I mean, the race card being one, crime being another, socialism being the third.
Yeah, it's Trump now. I mean, they don't have a coalition. I mean, Trump just dominates that party. He's going to run for president again, and there's nobody, 4 years from now is a long time, and he might be in the penitentiary. God knows what. He's overweight. He's in his mid-70s. I don't know. But as of right now, there is no Republican Party. It is a personality code. It's what it is. And they nail Mitch McConnell, and all they care about in legislative is getting tax breaks for rich people. And they'll continue to do that. But it's going to be driven into, not one of these guys that believes when Trump goes, they're going to be a real fight in the Republican Party. But I don't think it's going to be over issues. I think it's going to be over personality.
Hey, this episode is brought to you by Magic Spoon.
It's a delicious cereal that I love to wake up with in the morning.
Well, I tell you something, James. My grandson Kai, who I've been known to talk about once or twice on this show, that's what he eats for breakfast. That's about all. If he's able to come over Thanksgiving, because of, we're worried about that with the COVID, but if he is, we may have to serve Magic Spoon instead of turkey.
Well, it comes in coca, fruity, frosted, or blueberry. But my favorite right now is still blueberry.
Well, I like all four, but my son told me they actually have a peanut butter. I want to try that. I love all the above, and I think I kind of go for blueberry too, but boy, I'd love to try the peanut butter. It's 0 sugar, 11 grams of protein, and only 3 net carbs in each serving. It's keto-friendly, and, not to mention gluten, grain, soy, and GMO-free. It's the best out there. You just go to magicspoon.com/warroom to grab a variety pack and try it today. Be sure and use our promo code, which is War Room. It's all one word at checkout to get free shipping. And Magic Spoon is so confident in this product, it's backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. What that means is, if you don't like it, you can return it. That's magicspoon.com/warroom and use the code WARROOM for free shipping. Again, magicspoon.com/warroom. Use the code WARROOM and look for the link in our show notes. We thank Magic Spoon for sponsoring this podcast. Okay, James, as you know, Chris Huttman is encyclopedic in his knowledge of Georgia politics, which he has been engaged in for some time. The center of the political universe in America and maybe the world for the next 6 weeks is Georgia. 2 Senate races there that will determine which party controls the United States Senate. It's going to have a profound effect on policy and on Joe Biden. Chris, you've been doing this for a long time. You've never seen anything like this with the stakes so big. Conventional wisdom has been special elections or runoffs favor Republicans. Their people come out. Do you think that's true this time, or is the dynamics different?
Well, I think to be determined. The race that kind of set the conventional wisdom, of course, is the 2008 runoff when Obama came pretty close to winning the state. And then we had a runoff which determined basically the 60th vote in the Senate. It was Saxby Chambliss versus Jim Martin. And we lost the runoff, very badly a month later. And the state's just changed a lot since 2008 as far as, what part of the coalition for each party are likely voters or, surge voters. Our most recent experience was after the 2018 general election. Our Secretary of State's race was the only main race that made it to a runoff. And obviously, Stacey Abrams got about 48.9% in the first round, and most of the statewide, ticket down ballot people got somewhere between 48 and 48.5%. And we went to a runoff that year, and John Barrow, the former congressman, was running for Secretary of State. He ended up with 48.1%. So didn't do quite as well as Abrams had done in the first round, but nothing like the 2008 drop-off that we had seen in prior years.
So, one gets the impression that each of these candidates, all four of them, starts with about 48 or 49%, and you're not playing for very many persuadables here. And I'm thinking of Loeffler and Perdue both have big ethics issues. They're
sure.
really rich people who engaged in trading, made profits during the pandemic when they had inside information. Now, you're a Democratic consultant, I know, but does it matter, or does that just blow over right now? The intensity is so great on both sides.
Normally I'm one of those people that definitely still believes in persuasion and thinks that that's an important thing. But I think for this runoff, it's all about turnout. And I would, almost ignore the polling and look to kind of more objective measures like who's requested absentee ballots so far, which so far looks pretty good for our side. And also, to the extent that persuasion matters, I think persuasion this time is more about whether you vote or not. So there's been a couple of big changes in the Georgia electorate over the last 10 years. One of them is just the white share of the electorate continues to go down. Back in 2012, when Obama, lost by about 7 or 8 points to Mitt Romney, the white share of the electorate was 61.5%. As of this year, it's gone down to 58. So it's down, basically 3%. The black share has also gone down a little. Back in 2012, it was 29.9 for Obama. Now it's 27.3. So the black and the white share both gone down, but Asians gone from 1 to 2.5%. That's a huge increase. Numerically, about 40,000 Asian voters voted in 2012. This year it was 125,000. So you can see that that's just a huge increase. Hispanic, same deal. 51,000 people back in 2012. Earlier this month, 150,000. So 3 times as many. Big increases in other, small increases in unknown. So we've got like a different electorate than we had before. And then even within the white vote, you've got the traditional kind of Republicans that, James cut his teeth running against the Johnny Isaacsons of the world back in the 90s, who were the old school Georgia Republican Party. And just like everywhere else, like you see in the Midwest, a lot of these white voters that voted in 2016 and 2020 are these Trump surge voters, mostly in like rural areas, people who had, never come out before, including great Republican years like 2014. And I think the big question on persuasion or turnout or whatever is like, can the Republican Party of old hold together with these new Trump voters and, turn out in numbers that are sufficient to take on what's really a unified Democratic Party on our side for the first time in a long time?
Well, but also, can you turn out your voters in Gwinnett that turned out on November 3, and what the size of the African American vote will be?
Totally. And Gwinnett's like kind of a fascinating case study. I know James has like long been kind of very focused on Gwinnett. So I track every year, I have a spreadsheet that I update. It's kind of got like 10 or 11 key counties in Georgia. Most of them are metro Atlanta counties, but some of them are some, some rural counties that are representative, just to look at some trends. And so you had, all through the 2000s, Gwinnett stuck in the mid 30s. I mean, even in years that, Obama was doing pretty well in the state, 44, 41 when he ran for re-election. All of a sudden, Abrams getting 57 last year, Biden getting above 58 this year. But that is the one weak spot for John Barrow when he had his runoff. So Abrams got 56 and change when she ran in November. And then December of that year, when they had the runoff, Barrow slipped all the way down to 50.6 in Gwinnett. And so that is going to be the one place on our side where getting this new coalition out.
James, why don't you...
For our listeners, they're not that familiar with Georgia. Gwinnett is adjacent to Fulton County, which is Atlanta, and it's a fast-growing and increasingly diverse county. Would that be an accurate description of what we're talking about?
Yeah, and it has a history in the state. It was kind of one of the first counties to go when Georgia went from being a solidly Democratic state to a Republican state because it was this big suburban, county.
But I'm saying we assume that everyone knows what Gwinnett County is.
Sure, I shouldn't make that assumption.
I just wanted to get that. So if I came in, I said, Chris, I got $10 million. All right, where should I put it? What should I target? Where can I really make a difference? And I mean, one of the things that you and I have talked a lot, and then there was this upshot story about the black share.
Right.
The electorate being 27%. Is that accurate to your knowledge? And isn't that slightly disappointing? Weren't we kind of hoping for a bigger black share of the vote?
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways to look at it. On the one hand, it's slightly disappointing because Democrats have always believed that the only way that we could win Georgia was to get that number higher and higher because we were constantly seeing our white percentage of the electorate of what we were able to get go down. But I think in some ways it's a little bit encouraging because even when Obama was getting 30% of the electorate is black, and when we say that we mean out of every 100 people that votes, 30 of them are black. The turnout is probably 75, but that's what we mean. But Obama was maxing out at 47, 46 around there, and now what you're seeing is in a more diverse electorate where a lot of the increase is actually coming from non-black and non-white, so Asian, Hispanic, other, et cetera. So yeah, I think there's room to, potentially improve that, but the way that you're going to improve that number is through attrition elsewhere. I mean, you still did have a record, raw numerical turnout of black voters and basically everybody else. But so I think if you've got $10 million, it's a combination of, getting this rising American electorate in places like Gwinnett back out to the polls. And it's, getting the negative message out about Purdue and Loeffler to some of these Trump, white surge voters that basically, whatever you liked about Trump that you don't really like about these people. And I think there's a decent amount in their backgrounds that you can make that case.
Okay. So what is going to, this is the question. So on December 14th, it's going to be evident. I mean, some of these hardcore Trump people think he still has a chance and he's going to pull it out. And of course, we know no such thing is going to happen. And it's going to be rather definitive. What effect? And I'm trying to figure out what effect is that going to have? Because he had an enormous turnout among base Republicans, all over Georgia. I mean, if the white turnout was the fact that Biden won the state by it's going to end up like 12,000 votes. With that level of turnout is amazing. But what do you think is going to be the effect of him being defeated and him not on the ballot and, Purdue and Loeffler getting, clobbered on TV for insider trading and being, corporate Republicans and, blah, blah, blah. Is there some hope that can work?
Well, in the 2018 general election, you saw really a very Trump-esque turnout on both sides. Brian Kemp, for all of his shortcomings, has an appeal that's very similar to Trump's, and he was able to kind of match turnout. Obviously Abrams did a great job of turning out people on our side, but almost not quite to a 1-to-1 basis, but he was able to turn people out. And I think in the 2018 runoff, when you saw turnout go down a lot on both sides, you saw it recede both, a little bit with our people. The black share of the electorate was a little lower, although it was slightly higher than what it was in 2020. And, you saw in some of the rural counties, the Republican share of the vote recede a little bit. So when I say that, I mean, instead of getting 14%, Barrow was getting 17 or 18%. what really made the difference that in that runoff was just this rising American electorate really not coming back in places like Gwinnett. I think it's a real open question, what these people do. And I also think that the Republicans are playing with fire a little bit, because I do think, Georgia is probably percentage-wise has probably more never-Trumpers than almost any other state. We've got these, northern suburbs that were long represented by the Johnny Isaacsons of the world that were never really, super conservative, but they were always just very Republican, and those places have just really turned on Trump. And I think there are people, in that coalition that were kind of hoping if Biden won, and a lot of these people voted for Biden, but also for David Perdue in those northern counties, that maybe sanity would return. And I think they're looking at how Perdue and Loeffler have basically pledged allegiance to Trump and maybe thinking, well, I'm not sure that sanity will return. So I think there's an opportunity for Ossoff and Warnock to go after, some of those people who were hoping that a kind of traditional Republican Party would return and basically say, now the job's still not done, and we actually do need your vote this time again. Maybe in 2022 it'll be back to normal, but it's not there yet.
Okay. Well, Chris, Karl Rove apparently is going to be directing these two campaigns. It means it's going to get down and dirty. We know the race card's going to be pulled. Perdue already played the anti-Jewish card in the first go-round. Are the Democrats ready for this? Can they counter?
Yeah, I think they are. I mean, they've got a lot of dirt on Perdue and Loeffler, and Loeffler is kind of a fascinating case study. She emerged to the second round based on just using her personal fortune to drown out her Republican opponent, who actually was kind of more in line with what the base actually wants. But she probably outspent him at least 10-1, and she and her husband were funding a lot of outside expenditure. A lot of independent expenditures were being funded by them as well. So it's like all the spending was very, not legally coordinated, but basically she got anything she needed. There's not a lot of evidence I've seen from any polling that she's actually popular with the full electorate. And so there's a lot there. And her to the extent that her negatives have been explored so far, they've mostly really been explored in the context of a Republican primary, because we were in the midst of this jungle primary. So just because Collins, who was her main Republican opponent, took some shots at her, doesn't necessarily mean that the electorate that we care about now was paying attention, or that it was relevant to them. So I think you're going to see just a really ugly environment on both sides. And I will say one thing about some of the attacks on Warnock. I do think they need to be careful, because we are sitting on a potential cache of black voters who could re-engage, and the fact that they're already starting to go after him on Jeremiah Wright type stuff and things that he's done in the pulpit, etc., could actually backfire in some ways. I mean, I think that this is the problem that a lot of Republicans are going to have, is that sure, Trump did a little better with the black vote than maybe some Republicans in the past have done, but their playbook isn't really compatible with that going forward. And so I think this is going to be a good test to see how they navigate that, their propaganda about how great they're doing with black voters versus look what they say.
Let me ask you three people, if they'll come in and will it matter? Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and Donald Trump.
Barack Obama, I think, a great surrogate, probably the number one surrogate that you want. He's divorced enough from the current action, and he's obviously very popular with black voters, and there's some real evidence that he's popular with the kind of black voters that we've had trouble with. So it's kind of more rural, more conservative. Still have a good impression of him. I think him standing on stage with Warnock and Ossoff, very powerful. Good way to juice turnout. Biden, probably helpful, but he's got a lot on his plate with the transition stuff. I'm not sure how that politics plays into whatever else, because there's obviously still the question mark of are they going to pass any stimulus or anything like that between now and then? What's going on with the transition? Trump, I think, is the wild card, because sure, he comes in and he tells those rural Georgians what's on the line, and maybe they vote as well, but he's also been attacking the Republican Secretary of State, the Republican Attorney General, the Republican Governor. To me, that's much more of a question mark. If you're David Perdue or Kelly Loeffler, you probably want Trump to come into the state, but you probably don't want WSB, the big Atlanta TV station, to cover it. You just want it to be covered by the outmarket stations.
Right. James Carville.
Kind of hard to do. Yeah. So when Loeffler was appointed, all right, it was kind of a big. Doug Collins wanted it. I think Newt Gingrich's daughter was really in the running, and this was considered kind of a surprise appointment. And what my friends in Georgia were saying, well, Kemp recognizes the party needs some suburban appeal, and she's kind of moderate. Kind of the future way the Republicans can sort of stop the hemorrhaging. Was that your view? Were you surprised by her appointment, or did you see this coming? And what do you think was behind it? Because it did seem a little out of the box.
It was a little surprising, and she definitely leapfrogged some other people, legislators, maybe people that had been elected at the county or local level that might have made a little more sense. Obviously, I think the fact that she brought her checkbook with her and said, I can fund, this race and other races. And, one thing that you have to remember is that this is a special election. The seat's up again in 2022 when Kemp is up. So I think he's looking at it as, well, not only can I try to win this year, but I'll have a big spender who can help me in 2022. I think the problem with the execution I think the theory is great, which is that if you're Kemp, you're looking at, getting clobbered in the Atlanta suburbs, which was historically the party's base, saying I need to have a white female moderate back on top of the ticket to help me with those people. The execution's just been a real head scratcher. I mean, she's anti-Black Lives Matter, she's anti-cancel culture, she's flirting with QAnon. I mean, that seems like they've lost the plot. It seems like they had a decent plot, but they've lost it.
Right. She was kind of friendly with Stacey
lots
Abrams.
of pictures. Well, she owns a WNBA team.
Yeah. I mean,
and as I like to tell,
which is a lot of Democrats.
She basically says,
I'm just guessing off the top of my head.
She basically says, well, look how liberal this WNBA team has gotten. And it's like, when did, it's not like you bought it in 1940 and the WNBA has changed. She pretty much knew what she was getting into. And you read all these like really sad profiles where, she was very into the team. She had all the players over to dinner, and now she's playing this basically anti-Black Lives Matter, QAnon flirter. And you wonder, she's really sold herself out for this seat. And I think a lot of voters can kind of see right through that.
So, on the whole, do you think it's advantageous? To go back to Albert's question, Trump coming into the state, obviously the Atlanta TV station is going to show up wherever he shows up. I mean, he can't, that's not going to happen. If you're sitting there Saturday before the Tuesday election and you're Warnock, Ossoff, and they say Trump is coming in, what's your reaction? What do you think the reaction would be at that point?
You probably don't want it at the end of the day. That close.
I've seen him move votes in Alabama, and I've seen him move votes in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. I mean, the real wild card is these Northern Atlanta Republicans, these Never Trump Republicans that a lot of them did vote for Biden and then also voted for Perdue this time. Right. If you're Ossoff and Warnock, you look at that and you say, hopefully there's more for them to lose than there is to gain.
Right. All right, Albert.
Well, it'll be the next 7 weeks. It's the political universe. It's the political center of the universe, Chris. And we thank you for enlightening us on it. And we'll keep following you from now until January 6th. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, you were. We'll talk later today, I'm sure. But I knew you would be a great guest, Chris. And I think our listeners got a really good insight into Georgia, and this is everything that I hoped for and wanted in this interview. So thank you very much.
Glad I could help.
Probably have you back on sometimes before we go to post here because it's got. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, James, you counsel me almost every day. Don't get agitated over any Trump stories. Only it's going to get worse the next day. But even with that climate, the Washington Post Shane Harris story last week, that intelligence officials, now listen to this, were worried that ex-President Trump could compromise, maybe even sell sensitive American secrets and techniques. It was a shocker. You wanted to reread it the second time because it was just so stunning. Shane is a senior national security reporter for the Post, a book author, a foremost journalist on surveillance and intelligence. And Shane, it's always good to welcome a fellow Wake Forester to the program. And congratulations on that big story. But tell us how big a deal this is.
Well, I think it's a very big deal. And like so many things in the Trump administration, I mean, it's a novel dilemma that this one presents. We don't normally think about ex-presidents who have access to, I mean, literally all the secret information that they want as posing a risk of divulging it when they leave office. But here we have a president who, and this isn't speculative, has a documented track record of disclosing classified information while he's been in office, sometimes for apparent political gain, sometimes apparently just inadvertently. And so a lot of people who I talk to are genuinely worried that he will, through some slip of the tongue or perhaps worse, while he's no longer in office, reveal things that need to be properly kept secret, including potentially really sensitive information.
Well, you quote one intelligence official as noting that he is deeply in debt. He's bitter about losing. He's unhinged personally. That is, this official worries, the profile of a prescription for disaster.
That's right. I mean, and I think, and if you just think of it another way, if Donald Trump were an ordinary citizen and were applying for a job at the CIA that required a security clearance, I'm confident he would not get a clearance. Given his financial problems, even if they were a fraction of the kind of debt that he's in, would be a red flag. And plus, just I mean, the hostility he's openly expressed to the intelligence community, the kind of the conspiracy theories. He is not somebody who would be qualified for getting authorization to national secrets. Now, because he's the president, that's different. Obviously, the president, by virtue of being elected, kind of is the security clearance ultimately in government. But it is striking that he has these kinds of red flags on his record that otherwise would prevent him from getting access to this stuff.
Shane, the saving grace, Jack Goldsmith, a former Bush Justice Department official, says in your extraordinary story that Trump is so substantively lazy, he doesn't even delve into his daily intelligence brief, that he may not know or remember as much as someone else.
That's right, and I think Jack echoed the thought of a lot of other intelligence professionals too. These presidential daily briefings that we hear so much about, including right now because President-elect Biden is not getting them, they can range from being sort of, deeply substantive and in the weeds to kind of more high level. Trump's tend to be a little bit more of the latter, but, famously, I've talked to people who've been involved in the briefings with him. He doesn't pay a lot of attention. He doesn't ask a lot of follow-up questions. So there's a decent chance that just from the sort of the day-to-day interaction with the briefing material, he maybe hasn't absorbed a lot. That said, there's a lot of stuff he would know. I mean, particularly when it comes to processes and procedures. What are the steps we go to launch the nuclear missiles? Where do we have, what countries maybe do we have intelligence assets deployed in? So that kind of, procedural stuff or things he may have picked up along the way. But I do think it's important to keep in mind that this is not somebody who has engaged with intelligence in a sophisticated way in 4 years. And that ultimately does provide some defense.
James.
So, he blabbed about a new weapon system we had.
Mm-hmm.
He remembers that kind of stuff. I mean, he likes to play, soldier kind of thing. And I don't think there's much doubt that he remembers that, and there's not much doubt that the Chinese or the Russians or the Saudis would be highly interested in something like that. The other question here is, how much is Jared privy to this information?
So Jared has access, we know, from reporting to the presidential daily briefing, which is not untypical for other, senior White House officials or cabinet secretaries to get,
right,
as you know. In this case, he does have a security clearance, but only after his father intervened, his father-in-law, to get him one, because the CIA holds that clearance and Jared couldn't pass the test, basically, of the background check. So, Trump forced John Kelly to go in and get it done for him. Now, interestingly, Jared, just like any other former government employee, when he leaves, will have to sign a non-disclosure agreement that says you can't reveal anything you may have learned that is properly classified in the course of your duties. Ivanka will have to sign the same thing because she has a clearance. The president will not, but a lot of people pointed out to me, we didn't get into this too much in the story at all, but Jared is somebody who I think probably does have a more sophisticated understanding of this information. And also, I think for some of the same reasons, has to at least, in theory, pose a similar security risk. But he will be reminded of his obligations and the penalties of it in a way that his father-in-law will not when he leaves office.
But he could refresh his father-in-law's memory.
Sure.
Is the point. I mean, he doesn't have to get on the phone with the cutout of, the KGB, but he can certainly. Now, let me ask this as kind of a technical question. The presidential daily brief, is it just was it one thing in a computer and that's it? Or could Jared possibly have copies of it, or Trump? But what happens to it after the briefing? Does it just evaporate into cyberspace?
Well, traditionally what happens is they get it, and then in the case of anyone other than the president, there'll be somebody who actually lets them read it, and then they should take the copy back to the intelligence community. Okay. So it wouldn't be left with him. Now, would that stop him from writing something down or remembering something? No, obviously not.
Right. Yeah. And Jared is privy to this, and his memory is much clearer than President Trump's. Is there any chance, and this is kind of far-fetched, but I've asked you to respond to it, that the intelligence community would go get a FISA warrant to see if they're in danger of giving the country secrets?
Well, the only way,
I mean,
I would say there's a chance, but you'd have to meet a few conditions first. I mean, one would be they would have to have a reasonable basis to believe that Jared or whomever was acting as an agent of a foreign power. Now, in the scenarios we're talking about, that may not be so far-fetched if we're talking about somebody actually selling information. Right. And you'd have to demonstrate that there was an intelligence value to it. Then, though, you get into this just, again, novel and extraordinary area of, are you actually going to start monitoring for intelligence purposes a former president? I think by the time we even got to the point where they were contemplating a FISA request, something so dramatic would have happened that there might be all kinds of other defensive measures put in place. But, the straightforward answer to your question is yes, in theory.
Shane, you and Phil Rucker wrote a piece a couple weeks ago that said that Putin has just made out terrifically the last 3 or 4 years. Trump has been a gift to him. Now, I'm connecting some dots here that may or may not be connectable. But Bob Woodward, as you know, reported that Trump's former director of national intelligence, Dan Coats, still had suspicions, not proof, but suspicions, that the Russians may have something on Trump. Do some of your sources think that?
They do, and it is remarkable that here as we approach the end of Trump's 4 years in office, there are still these unanswered and open questions about his relationship with Russia, and more importantly, his business dealings in Russia. We know that the Mueller investigation, deliberately didn't delve into the president's finances. Would they have found answers to some of these questions? It's possible, but this is something that still lingers out there, and people wonder about because it is one explanation for his obsequious positioning and behavior towards Putin all of these years, despite all of the reasons that he should not be treating him as a friend. So that I think kind of compounds some of the anxiety here as well. I mean, just in talking through with sources, plausible scenarios. I said, look, could Trump somehow implicitly or explicitly trade national security information for a building permit in Moscow? This didn't strike people as far-fetched. I mean, these are the kind of things that you would worry about, particularly when he's someone who's tried to do business in that country before and has expressed so much, admiration for the president.
Wow. And we mentioned Dan Coats a minute ago, who I think was genuinely respected in much of the intelligence community. Correct me if I'm wrong. The same can't be said for the current DNI director, John Radcliffe, can it? How much damage is he doing?
Yeah, you're right about Dan Coates. I mean, somebody who didn't have a strong, a deep background in national intelligence, but respected nonetheless, and seen, I think, as a statesman, former ambassador to Germany, of course. John Ratcliffe is viewed, I think, most universally as anything but. I mean, someone who is very much, and it saddens a lot of my sources to say it, but seen as just kind of a political henchman who is there doing the bidding of the president, is not fulfilling the job of speaking truth to power, which is the ethos of the intelligence community. And people think he's done some real damage in the way that he has pushed to declassify information from the probe of Russian interference in the 2016 election. I should say selectively declassify that information and push it into the public domain in a way that I think objectively can be seen as trying to prove the president's narrative that there was some kind of conspiracy against him by the intelligence community, and that the Russia interference in the 2016 elections was concocted somehow. Ratcliffe has been a leading force in doing that, and it's really, I mean, when I talk to sources, they kind of already hold Ratcliffe out as the example of what you absolutely do not want in somebody in that position. At the same time, it's not surprising to him.
Well, Joe Biden will correct that. I'm confident he'll change the policies. Do you have any sense of the people he's going to put at DNI, at CIA? Could he keep Gina Haspel?
I doubt that he'll keep Gina Haspel, and I don't know that Gina Haspel wants to stay past the Trump administration. I think she's signaled that she's ready to retire after a long career. The two names that it's really come down to at this point for who would take over at CIA and DNI are Michael Morell, who was formerly the deputy director at CIA, career intelligence officer and analyst, was the acting director for a period of time, and a woman named Avril Haines, who was the deputy CIA director and also the deputy national security advisor in the Obama White House. So right now, kind of in the parlor game, it looks like Morell at CIA and Haines at DNI, or maybe switching those two. But it gives you a sense of where Biden is going, which is to say people with, deep experience who've held managerial positions at the top of the community before. In Morell's case, a career officer who's widely respected in the agency, and I think would be seen as not at all disruptive. In the case of Avril Haines, highly competent, quite brilliant national security professional who's managed big operations before. So he's going to the A list here.
Good, James.
Yeah, Shane, how many years have you covered these kinds of issues, national defense, security, intelligence, et cetera? So just give us some idea.
Sure. I started covering this pretty much after 9/11. So what that puts us at about 19, 20 years now.
So 19, 20 years. All right. You wrote a story, and I just want to be very clear what it is. You had, I think, 6 or 7 on the record, pretty impressive sources saying there's a genuine worry in the intelligence community that the president might sell the nation's secrets. That's the upshot of the story.
That's
Correct? Okay, that's breathtaking. All right, I just wanted to make sure that our listeners heard exactly that a highly experienced, highly sourced journalist had on the record names. All right, not speaking on the background for fear of retribution, but names of really senior people. Now, how big of a morale crisis is the new DNI or CIA director going to face? It must have been hell if your whole life has been in intelligence and you've done all of this. This must have been just a miserable 4 years.
Yeah, it has been for a lot of people in the community, and and you've seen people driven to do things that they never would have done, contemplated doing. I mean, former CIA directors coming out and speaking out against the president. Career CIA officers, in some cases, being quoted now as critiquing the current, DNI on the record. So people who just don't get into the fray at all when they, and I think that that's a measure of how the morale has kind of hit rock bottom, and really the way that career intelligence community officials believe there's been a genuine crisis in the community really since the president took office. And we remember, his first official stop in Washington the day after inauguration was he stood in front of the memorial wall at CIA headquarters in that kind of solemn marble lobby with the stars representing officers in the line of duty who had died behind him. And he bragged about his crowd size. That set the tone. I mean, I remember sitting there watching that, getting my phone just blowing up with text messages from sources who couldn't believe what they were seeing, that he turned, basically their version of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier or whatever appropriate memorial into a political prop. That set the tone. That tells you where morale has been for a long time. They see now, I think, though, with the Biden administration coming in, as really kind of, very, very hopeful, particularly if someone like Mike Morrell takes over at the CIA and there are really kind of, professionals back in charge. But there's going to be some digging out to do. I mean, this has been, 4 years don't just, evaporate overnight. And I think you've seen a lot of good people leave during the Trump administration. There have been some really top-notch experts on Russia in particular who've left. I know people who said that they were not staying if he was reelected. So the morale crisis will start to abate pretty dramatically, but it's not cured, I think.
So one more thing, and I'll turn it back over to Al. This meeting he had, I think, in Helsinki with Putin, that he kicked everybody out the room. Is there genuine concern, or is there real curiosity in that world as to what possibly went down there, or what could have gone down? Because it just is fitting here as civilian, and I don't know, during the Clinton administration, that was a different part of the world that the political people just didn't occupy. So I have friends that were CIA agents, but was that discussed in the intelligence community about what could have happened during that meeting? Because it did seem a little odd.
Absolutely. And a similar meeting that happened in Hamburg as well, where, basically there was nobody in the room. And I think in the Hamburg case, I may be wrong on whether it was this or Helsinki, the president actually wanted the notes taken away from the interpreter. That has, fueled suspicion, understandably so, ever since. And we've never really gotten to the bottom of that. Why a president would need to be in a room alone without his aides around him is just perplexed people. And again, it deeply worries them. And those questions aren't going to go away. And I think that if the president, as a former president, starts traveling abroad, and particularly if he decides to go to Russia and sort of have meetings there, you're going to see that all come back up again, and those kind of lingering suspicions come to the fore. And I should say, too, and these are things that, just to underscore it, career intelligence officials never imagined even having to contemplate about a sitting president. The idea that he would want to have a meeting that was so private that even his close aides didn't know what was said in a room with the Russian president. It was baffling, and it remains so.
Well, it sure does. And I think you're right to put that at the top of the list. I also would watch carefully about Jared Kushner traveling to Saudi Arabia and what would come of that. Boy, Shane Harris, this has been just a fascinating session. You have enlightened us. This is such a big, big story, and you are such a great reporter. I give the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal and Time and those other places credit, but I also want to credit your alma mater and my alma mater, Wake Forest. You did us proud, Shane.
Go Deeks. Thanks, Al. Thanks, James.
Hey, thanks for listening to Politics War Room with James Carville, and I'm Al Hunt. Remember to email your questions to politicswarroom@gmail.com or tweet them for next week's show at Politicon. Thank you for subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. Please rate the show with a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with another show. Send your questions in as we continue our War Room planning for 2021. Be safe.